Emotions, we all have them. Even that colleague you suspect is a sociopath has them. Researchers think that 90% of our thoughts involve emotions directly. That's not even considering emotions that prompt thoughts or thoughts that prompt emotions. Like, emotions are part of everything we do, and yet, so many of us misunderstand how do emotions actually come about. The more we can understand where emotions come from, the more we can make strategic choices for ourselves, those we work with, those we teach, on how to facilitate the positive emotions that move our lives forward. And that's where we're heading today, is to get nerdy around how emotions get constructed. I'm Chase, helping you improve the effectiveness of learning through the effectiveness of teaching. Welcome to Effective Teaching in Action. So a great place to start this conversation is to think about, when is a moment when you maybe snapped or lost your cool? We're going to talk about the idea of anger. Where does anger come from as an example? I remember a moment early in my teaching when I completely snapped at my students because I couldn't control the window blinds. That's right, it was that ridiculous. I remember it was at the end of a very exhausting day, sixth period, at the end of an exhausting year, mid-May. And I was a teacher who looked like a child and had the last name Milky. So all day long, I was being taunted by students calling me Milk Dud and 2% and skim milk. My lesson went horribly wrong. I did not have the skill set to engage students. And so I was frustrated with the lesson, and I was like, you know what? I'm just gonna put on the film version of this because I need to be done with this day. And so I go to close the blinds, and all of a sudden the blinds do that thing where I pull on it and part of them shift. And then so I pull again and it shifts the other way. And I hear the snickering and the laughter behind me. And the more they laugh, the angrier I get, and I pull and it shifts, and all of this starts to build. And then finally I turned around and snapped at my students. Now, I don't remember what I said, but I guarantee it wasn't helpful, and I guarantee it wasn't their fault. This was totally a me problem. You've probably had that moment before. So let's talk about, where does that emotion like anger or joy or hope or sadness, where do they come from? Now, our first key understanding, like this changed my understanding of emotions and life, is that emotions are not chosen, emotions are constructed. They are built from multiple bits of information coming into our brain at the same time. So in other words, that road rager isn't just choosing to be an angry jerk. Someone isn't just choosing to be stressed and worried about something. A student isn't just choosing to lack curiosity and perseverance. It is built from all of these different factors, which means if we can understand the building blocks of an emotion, we can help facilitate, orchestrate those to build the emotions that move us forward. Now, although there are many building blocks, I have three that I refer to as effectors that I think are the ones we have the most influence on, both for ourselves, our students, and those that we lead and teach. Now, the centerpiece of this building construction of emotion experience is a part of the brain called the amygdala. You've probably heard of it, deep within the limbic system. There are these little almond-shaped parts of the brain in each hemisphere, and among its many jobs, the amygdala is trying to assess for emotional valence. That's just a nerdy term for, like, is this safe or not? Is this a threat or not? Is this good or bad? And so your amygdala is trying to figure out what emotion is going to create the actions and behaviors that help me survive, that use energy to try to survive or conserve energy. Like, that is its job. Now, it's also important to know that your amygdala and all of your brain is contained in this dark black box called your skull. So it is having to pull from lots of different information to make this assessment of what emotion helps us move forward. So let's look at one of the sources, one of the effectors, our body, sensory cues, both what we hear, smell, taste, touch, as well as internal cues like hunger and heart rate and blood pressure. And that's a key understanding. There's a sense called interoception, the ability to monitor what's happening internally, that is going to affect our emotional cues. When I snapped at my students, I was exhausted. Like, physically, I was depleted of resources. I was probably breathing like stuffy, unclean air all day. And all of those cues were contributing, increasing the likelihood of anger. If it were first period and I had more energy, I probably would not have had that same emotional response. And so what's happening in and around our body, our senses, is going to help construct that emotion. Our second effector is the context or environmental cues. Sensory information isn't relevant until we put it into context. The same sensory cue can give different emotional states. If I smell burning, if that's happening in a school building in the middle of the day, like I might get an emotion of fear. However, if I smell burning from a campfire that I have built in the middle of summer, like that might cue joy and nostalgia. Next to our amygdala is a part called the hippocampus. It's what consolidates memories. It helps us draw from our long-term memory. And that part is working in tandem with the amygdala to make sense of the context. Based off of what's happening in my environment, what is the best emotion to help me survive? So if I were fighting the window blinds in an empty room, I would not have had anger in the same way. If my principal were in the room observing me, that change in the environment would have changed the emotional response. What I could have done in that moment is shifted the environment myself. Now, that doesn't mean run out of the room, but I could have shifted the cue. Rather than students looking at me alone as the focal point, I could have turned around and said, hey, I'm struggling. I'll give some like bonus life points to students who can help me figure out the blinds. And now we've shifted the environmental cue and context of this is a teacher problem to a class-wide problem. Let's solve this together. So we have our body cues, those sensory experience. We have the environmental context. And our third effector is our thoughts. So coming from the frontal lobe, thinking can cue emotions. For example, if I think of a funny moment that happened in the past, I'm going to probably get an emotion like joy. If I think about a failure, I might get a little bit of hopelessness. If I watch a comedy, I'm filling my thoughts with comedic ideas, more joy. If instead I decide to fill my thoughts with sensationalized news about how the earth is burning and everyone is in a horrible situation, then I'm probably going to cue more unpleasant sorts of emotions. Thoughts can cue those emotional responses. In that moment of snapping at my students, I simply thought they're laughing at me. I'm losing control. I need to get it together. I need to be the authority. All those thoughts were contributing to an anger response rather than something a little bit more playful. Had I thought, this is silly, I need some help with this, that might have cued a different emotional response. So here's how I like to visualize this moment of construction. We have these three effectors, all feeding bits of information in to cue that emotion. Now, what effective teachers do really well is they are looking proactively at how can I shift one of these to create a different emotional response. So do I need to shift the thought in this moment? Do I need to do something different with my body, slow, deep breaths, or make sure that I eat the food that nourishes me, or make sure that I get good sleep, or even stand up and walk versus sit? How do I shift the environment? So if I'm going to be connecting with a student about some corrective action, if I'm standing over the top of them, look me in the eyes, that's going to create a more defensive sort of emotion than if I sit side by side looking at the table or looking at a third point reference rather than eye to eye with that. Those little environmental shifts are also going to create a change. Now, this is just the launch of a video series. We're going to dive a little bit deeper into each of these effectors in upcoming and talk about things like, what ways did thoughts not help shift our emotional states? And in what ways do they? What are some examples of little environmental cues based off of emotions I want out of my students? Are there ways I can cue a shift in body cues, sensory information, so that I'm building the emotion I want out of students before they get dysregulated or bored or sleep in the middle of class? The next time you are remembering an emotion you experienced, try to think of what were the effectors that contributed to that emotion. What was the thought or series of thoughts that contributed? What was happening in the environment, the context around me? What was happening in or near my body, my sensory experience that might have contributed? And if that was a positive emotion, how can you recreate those effectors? If it was a less than positive, unpleasant emotion, which one of those effectors could you have shifted to potentially build a new emotional experience? Emotions are not chosen, they are constructed from at least these three effectors. Do some reflection. As always, feel free to share your experiences. Remember that we all experience emotions, but they aren't coming out of nowhere and they are not chosen. We do have control and influence over our and our students' emotional states. I'm Chase, helping you improve the effectiveness of learning through the effectiveness of teaching. Thank you for diving into effective teaching in action.